Yes. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Wow, we got a bunch of people back in the room too. Hi, Matthew. Hi, Zuli. That was a wonderful keynote. So now we're going to move on. Matthew, you are next for a 30-minute keynote. I won't stay, even though, you're muted. I won't stay, although you and I can have some of the best fun ever. So maybe I'll be in the chat in your ear here.
All right, sounds good. Let's get this kicked off. So we're going to I've got two wonderful guests here. We're going to be talking about security and privacy after 2020. I mean, this has been a kind of a crazy year. It really has been. And we've currently got incredible challenges with security and privacy, and it only up levels every day, every minute. However, I've got some great guests here, and we're going to be talking about what is that next step? What does it look like next year or the year after? What do we need to do now to make things better? And what should we be worried about now that potentially is going to make things worse, right? Sun Tzu was famous for saying, do what's great while it's small. Well, we can only change what we're doing now, but we need to look with foresight. So we've got Zuli Ramzan. He's the RSA Chief Digital Officer. And we've also got Marcelo Paredo. He's the CISO from the city of San Jose. Welcome, gentlemen. So I'd like to kind of kick this off and get both of your thoughts. What are the long-term and the short-term risks we really need to be thinking about, right? Just give me your top 2 or 3 that you think moving forward. Let me start off with you, Zuli.
Oh, man, I was hoping to go for Marcelo first, so I have time to think about that answer. Let me give you a couple of quick thoughts. I mean, so first of all, in the short term, I think what's happened, as many of you know, in the last 6 months, 7 months, organizations have made a lot of quick decisions to enable remote workforces, about workforce transformation, enable digital transformation, to basically continue to do what they need to do as part of operating their business. And as part of that, they took on a lot of technical debt, right? They made a lot of quick decisions to get things up and running. And so I think this year is going to be all about, or this coming year is going to be all about the comeuppance of those decisions. How do I now recognize that I've made a bunch of quick decisions that are going to have long-term implications, and how do I manage those implications, especially around the remote workforce transformation, and so on and so forth. So I think that's going to be the near-term challenge for most organizations. In the longer term, my big worry is we have, all these new digital systems coming online, and what people forget about is when a new system comes online, it's very rare that the new system replaces the old system. What ends up happening is you now have 2 systems that you have to manage, because there's always some bizarre use case that the old system will manage that you can't manage with the new system. And so complexity in general is always antithetical to security and to managing risk. They tend to go kind of in opposite direction. So there'll be, I think, a longer term implication of how we deal with the complexity of digital transformation in light of everything going on today.
Got it. Marcelo, your thoughts. What are the top 2 or 3 big things that we need to be rattling in our brain as we look forward?
Thank you, Matt. I think that if you look back at 2020, and I hope the echo is not just me, or it is just me, but I was thinking of the pandemic, right? How that changed the way we do things. And I think the remote work has changed the risk posture for most organizations, and that includes the city of San Jose. And I have echo. I hope. Let me do a sound check. Is that only me? Okay. All right. So let me continue with my thought. So the threat landscape has also changed. And so the guys are looking to attack those remote work. And so what we need to do in the short run is to really adapt and to really embrace some of these new technologies that will help us protect moving forward in this new normal, if you will. And so in the long run, we need to be able to look at privacy, and there, in my mind, there's things that we need to do at a legal level, and I think that becomes a little controversial because, of course, folks have different points of views, And in the prior stage, I saw the heated interchange of information. And if you think about the legal aspects, let's say once that gets ironed out, we will begin to use at the at the ethical aspects of privacy, and of course the protection of it. As a CISO, I think that a lot of the overlap between privacy and security is the protection of it, and so as we embrace this new world, I think the protection of the data and making sure that we collect only the data that we're supposed to and we protect that data will be important.
Excellent. I think you're right, especially with this new normal. It's bringing things out that people hadn't thought about, even contemplated about, and it kind of kicked everybody in the side and pushed us forward potentially into areas that we were less comfortable with, and there was a rush. So, when we talk about the complexity of technology, we talk about the challenge of the regulatory and the legal issues and this whole mindset of what new normal is now. And there may be a new normal coming. Who knows, right? What are those tangible things that individuals, businesses, and smart cities can do now, can start working on now to help resolve some of those issues? Marcelo, what is that recommendation? What steps, practical steps?
Great question, and I think at the city, we're actually one of those organizations that needed to adapt quickly, and we needed to actually embrace 7,000 people changing the way they work. As soon as the pandemic hit. And so one of the first things and the most important things that I would think that we all need to look at is how we're rolling out new technology. I think right now there's a really good opportunity for organizations to roll out technology that allows people to conduct business remotely and do things differently. I remember the days where we would used to print and we used to walk to the next cube or the next office and get the signature, scan the document, and send it over. Well, those days are gone, right? And so we're digitalizing the way we do things. We're changing our procedures. We're changing the way we do business. And so I would say the number one thing in my mind is to make sure that we don't rush through those rollouts, because in that rush, we may be overlooking some of the security aspects of those technologies and some of the privacy components that we need to look at. And so that to me is the most important. And of course, as we look at the gaps that you posture or the new way of doing things have generated, in the past, a small percentage of people was remote, but now the majority of the people are remote, and therefore the perimeter has changed. If you look at and you do a true assessment of your controls, you're going to find out that by allowing people to use their personally owned device or devices, you've opened yourself for a lot of risk, new risk, right? So I think that the things that you would need to do practically as well are, making sure that all those personally owned devices are not introducing new risk to the organization. You want to enforce multi-factor authentication. You want to ensure that those new devices have the right security posture before you join or you allow them to join to your network. And in some cases, you want to put layers in between them, put a security broker before they actually come onto your network. You want to scan those devices and make sure that some of those vulnerabilities have been mitigated, and that's a constant and of course interaction, right? And you want to review your firewalls. You want to actually put a firewall in each one of those devices if possible, right? And so I've seen and I've heard that in the rush to roll out and to provide devices to employees, sometimes the security patches are overlooked, and that's very important, right? You don't want a large portion of your workforce not getting patches and not getting the updates that those workstations or endpoints need. And of course, all this comes down to protecting data and protecting the data that you're collecting. And I will probably expand more on if you allow me time later, but at the city, we actually are working very hard in establishing our new privacy policy. And our privacy policy is based on principles like, for example, we collect only what we need. We're open and transparent. we give control over your data. We share only what we need, and of course, we value privacy. And earlier, somebody mentioned that the designing privacy into products or into solutions is the most important thing, and for us, that is true as well. We design and build products for privacy and for security.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? I mean, technology can be that double-edged sword. And you brought up a lot of concerns about making sure that it goes out, it rolls out correctly. You mentioned a lot of good industry best practices, and whatever perception we had of a perimeter, I think in the last year that's really kind of dissolved, and people have realized it's a new world. So, Zuli, I mean, you're a tech expert. You've been around this forever. What do you think in regards to new technology? What are those? And I do want to get back to the question too, but I'm really interested in kind of what your thoughts are in what Marcelo's saying here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Marcelo. I mean, I can tell you that how many phone calls we got on a Friday or a Saturday saying, can you, by Monday morning, enable 7,000 people to work remotely? In fact, that was the single largest fast turnaround we had was one customer who said 7,000 people by Monday with a call on a Saturday. And imagine getting to procurement, all these pieces had to be done, and we were successful, but that was the norm, right? For the last few months, that was a very common call to get from governments all the way to large organizations, obviously small organizations as well, but at a smaller scale. But that was number one. So I think the bigger issue to me, and I think what really made this a defining moment for RSA was in the recognition that, we've been around this industry for a long time. We've seen every crazy scenario you can imagine with regard to getting something up and running for a customer. The 7,001 weekend, that was sort of that was pushing what we even thought was doable, but we did it. But I think what customers need more than ever, it's not so much about the new and the fancy, it's about, can you get the basics to just work and evolve with a more complex environment? Like Marcel's environment is going to be changing every day, right? Every day new things are coming in. He's got to figure this. And so to me, every organization has to think about how to future-proof their investments. They're making an investment now in their identity strategy, in their security strategy. That ability to future-proof that investment so that as your organization evolves, you continue to have its needs met with the right set of tools and techniques and procedures and processes. That is really the name of the game right now. In terms of where we're kind of thinking ahead, it's really about kind of moving and making that experience much more frictionless while still managing risk effectively. So topics like the passwordless experience, how do we minimize the use of passwords without necessarily implicating safety along the way? We recognize passwords have a use, but there's many other things you can do. You can look at environmental attributes. And in fact, we borrow this from the banks. We actually, at RSA, have developed technology for the banks for many years. If you go to your bank's website, and you type your username and password in to log in, it turns out they don't really care that you type the right password in as part of the experience, because they assume that somebody who's not you already knows your password. And that's a pretty reliable assumption for a lot of people these days. What your bank will look at is every other aspect of that transaction. What time of day did you log in? Where did you log in from? What was the configuration on your system at the time of login? What behaviors did you then engage in? Are those behaviors high-risk behaviors from the perspective of the bank? Like, did you make a large balance transfer, or did you do something unusual compared to what you typically do? And it turns out that all those signals and amalgamation are a far better indicator that you are who you say you are than simply knowing a string of zeros and ones or a string of characters on a keyboard. And we've now taken that same concept and applied it en masse to organizations around the world to reduce their friction, but while still providing a level of security that was probably higher and a level of risk management that was higher than before. And so that's really kind of where we are evolving. Obviously, concepts like zero trust have come in over and over again. Yeah. We've been doing zero trust before the term was invented. Now we're starting to market it more because everyone expects us to talk about terms that are in the vogue. But really, for me, zero trust is more a larger approach of how to minimize a trust surface and how to manage a dynamic workforce in a world that's constantly evolving.
So do you think from a technology perspective, as we look at the threats and challenges beyond 2020, right? Do you think zero trust is one of those, key aspects that people need to start embracing, getting away from just the single password and even evolving past two-factor authentication, getting into multi-factor and bringing in other data? Is that the big focus that you see in knocking down some of the risks moving forward, or are there other technologies as well that you think are a necessity for us to be exploring or integrating now?
Yeah, so I'll provide a perspective, but I'm really curious to get Marcelo, because he's trying to make it real at the city level, which I think is a really daunting challenge. And for me, it's a part of my role at RSA is also manage our internal security And so I kind of wear this hat, a dual hat, the external facing hat, as well as how we think about how we bring new technologies. And so first of all, I think zero trust to me it's not a product or a framework or a strategy even, it's a mindset. It's really about how you should be thinking about security. And I think people often conflate it with other elements. Just because a vendor says zero trust on their website does not mean they'll make you any more zero trust than you are today. And if a vendor doesn't say zero trust on their website, that doesn't mean that they're not going to help you on that journey. What I think really the focus has to be on is how do I minimize a trust surface? How do I minimize what I have to trust inherently? Because when you trust something inherently, that typically means you're making a leap of faith assumption about whether that element or entity is actually trustworthy. And that's a distinction people often don't make between trust and trustworthiness. We want to minimize what we have to trust in order to get environments that are maybe more trustworthy. The real focus for us is on what I think of as maybe more like lean trust. How do I minimize that trust surface, but subject to maximizing my reduction in risk for every dollar I spend? The biggest challenge I see going forward is that everyone is going to have a lot to get done from a security perspective, from a privacy perspective, from a risk management perspective. And budgets aren't getting bigger necessarily, so we have more problems to solve, more complex situations. There's still the same budget envelope. Therefore, it's important more than ever to prioritize those investments. Which investments are going to give you the best benefit? Which ones are going to maximize your reduction in risk? And that requires a conversation around risk. Now, unfortunately, I can't think of a two-word, sexy, scintillating sounding way to describe that concept. If I come up with one, I'll let you know. But I think that really it's that latter concept around lean trust and minimizing risk. That's really where we're focused in terms of getting our customers on their zero trust journey. But that to me the zero trust is not the be all end all. It's really a single step in a direction that's much more complex and robust.
In finding kind of that optimal balance, right, between managing the risks and the costs and the user friction and manageability of it, everything, it's finding that sweet spot. So Marcelo, what are your thoughts in regards to zero trust or some of the new technologies coming out from a practical perspective? What are you worried about in implementing those to start protecting your environment moving forward?
So great question. I think that, and I agree with Sulfikar that there is obviously focus on identity and trust, and zero trust has been around, and so have other approaches, methodologies. We have CIS, top 20 controls. We have the risk management framework. We have the cybersecurity framework, ISO standards, and so forth. So the city decided to embrace the cybersecurity framework from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And of course, when you look at the security holistically, and of course privacy is also coming up with their own models. And if you were to look at two Venn diagrams, you would see the overlaps between privacy and security. But when you look at how the framework methodically analyzes and gives you the ability to manage risk, it has the identify component, the protect, detect, respond, and recover. And when you start breaking that down, it comes down to looking at where you actually have gaps in your environment and the system that you're trying to protect. And to me, it varies, right? It varies because of the threat landscape changing, like we've seen in the past few months. And so whatever was okay or acceptable last year, all of a sudden, when you go back and you utilize your methodical approach in analyzing risk, that has changed. And so, I think that the methodical approach of managing risk is what is going to yield you the best results, because you can have a formula or an approach to look at risk and apply the resources that you need in order to mitigate that risk and get to an acceptable level again. And it's an ongoing effort. And zero trust comes into play when you start analyzing each one of those controls and say, hey, how should we look at this control? If we were the bad guys, how can we implement this control so it would absolutely give us the best level of comfort that we need?
Yeah, good point. So let me take this conversation in a little bit different direction, right? We all look at 2020 and panic and fear and trash cans on fire. Okay, great. We're concerned about the future, but for every risk, there's always an opportunity. And although we may not feel like it right now in 2020, right, from a security and privacy perspective, what are the opportunities coming out of this? Is there more awareness? Is there more vigilant to the core basics of security, right? The NIST standards and other things. Is there a willingness of maybe opening the pocketbook up and people and companies spending more money? I mean, what are the opportunities coming out of 2020 in the security and privacy space? Marcelo, what are your thoughts?
So I would say, as bad as it sounds, we've been waiting for this moment in the sense that as cybersecurity professionals for the past 15, 10 years, or you name it, it depends how long you've been in this industry, we've been saying, we don't have a voice. We say it's not secure and nobody listens. Security is not baked in the solutions. And we don't, we're not part of the, big table where the decisions are made. We're an afterthought. Well, this is your opportunity to get on that big table, to come up with your big ideas, with your big solutions, and tell people you should stop doing that because that's going to get us in trouble, or you should do this, and this is the path to get there. And so that's a huge opportunity, right? And so from the business perspective, I think that I was alluding early to the fact that the days where you carry your paper and then you have people sign and you do your workflow in a kinetic or physical space are gone. All those procedures now need to be digitalized. All those automations that will yield the end result, facilitate that transaction in a digital world, are being embraced, because otherwise the business are coming to a halt. Of course, there are certain businesses that you will never be able to automate everything. But, for example, in the city, a lot of the things that we require people to come into City Hall and do those transactions are now being enabled to be performed online. And are we sacrificing perhaps some I would say, benefits of doing things kinetically? Maybe. Are we gaining some other things? I would say absolutely. So this is an opportunity for business to actually rethink how they do things, and they can actually maximize and optimize some of those procedures.
That's it. I couldn't agree more with Marcelo. There's a concept in economics called creative destruction. It's actually associated with an economist named Joseph Schumpeter, and it's called also Schumpeter's scale. But the core concept is that oftentimes periods of destruction are followed by periods of innovation, right? Sometimes you have to destroy the old way of doing things in a metaphorical and maybe almost a physical sense before we can allow new ideas to come in, or maybe even good ideas that have been around for a long time to get their time and place to shine. In the security industry, we've absolutely seen that. I think we're going to continue to see that, and I'll give you a few key examples. So number one, we are seeing a lot of organizations now embrace more cloud technologies as part of basically enabling remote workforce. They're trying to move away from on-premises type management. And I think that's actually good for most organizations. Most organizations don't really have the capacity to manage large on-premises infrastructures. They set them up anyway, and they can't manage them effectively, and that leads to security issues that nobody's fixing. When you transition that to a cloud environment, you now have the benefit of the economies of scale of the cloud provider who can potentially manage what's going on. So you lose some control, but I would say net people are going to be kind of more secure or have less risk by relying on someone else who can actually manage that environment effectively. So that's number one. Number two, Marcelo alluded to the idea of the vanishing perimeter, right? We've known about the perimeter vanishing for a long time. The solution to the vanishing perimeter, or one way to approach it, is to really push your security towards the edge. Put that endpoint protection in place. Endpoint monitoring and visibility becomes more critical in that world. A lot of organizations were reluctant to do that because it's a headache to push a bunch of agents out and to monitor. This whole situation has forced the issue. We really cannot afford to exist without managing endpoints in a better fashion than we have in the past. So that's been the second key trend. The third key trend, and it's related to the second one, is really that importance of visibility across what's happening in my environment. Visibility has been this underserved part of security. Everyone is so focused on trying to prevent stuff from happening. And the reality is that yes, to a certain degree, you want to put some investment in your prevention technologies, but those returns quickly become diminishing because threat actors are smart enough to know how to get past your first line of controls. In fact, they're testing it. They have QA labs inside of these threat. They're literally testing every single known security technology, and they already know they can get past it. That's not the issue for them. And therefore, your only recourse as an organization is, can I see what's going on? Can I detect and respond effectively? And that's predicated on having visibility across all your key digital assets. And so we're seeing now more organizations invest heavily in visibility as part of a key part of the security strategy, something they weren't doing before, but that they needed to do. So I'm hopeful that all this stuff that's happening with COVID with the global pandemic, it's also giving rise to opportunities to think about new ways of doing things, or really to embrace the best way of solving certain problems versus being caught up in legacy and status quo.
You guys both bring up really important things here, right? Because of some of these issues, the awareness is going up. It's going up with the end consumer. It's going up with the executives. It's going up with the peers of the CISO and within organization to make cybersecurity and privacy more relevant. And that's huge. That's a stepping stone. And with that, potentially leads that next step, responsibility. Who's responsible for this? Let's make sure that they're accountable. Let's empower them to have that responsibility. And, Marcella, you were talking about, hey, having that visibility potentially at that C-suite level or at the board level, hugely important, right? Instead of just being a scapegoat when something bad happens, actually empowered to be able to do things. And, then that leads potentially to investment, right? Where companies are proactively and not just, hey, just put in anti-malware and we're done. We also need those detective and responsive capabilities to be able to handle when things get through that first line of defense. And yes, we need more than a first line of defense. We need that defense in depth or layered technologies. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes here. So 30 seconds from each one of you. Will the combination of all those things, all of them, lead the industry to see, view, and truly embrace cybersecurity and privacy as a competitive advantage? Is it enough of a tipping point? Zuli, what do you think?
I hope that that's the case, but I think ultimately it's not about the industry. It's going to be about our customer base, because
yes. Everybody, the ecosystem, yes.
Right, but I think that's going to be the first and foremost thing. If we can get that uprising on the customer side to value the right things, that will enable the industry to move forward. And I'm confident that can happen in light of everything going on. We've seen more and more importance in digital. The stakes have never been higher, and everyone's going to, I think, embrace what that means as part of a new normal.
Great. 30 seconds, Marcella, your thought. Is it
so we'll probably look at it in a way that it's really not a competitive advantage. It's a minimum required to stay in business. And so companies that actually don't meet that minimum required, their risk goes up. And so their survivability in the long run is at stake.
Got it. So it's in the organization's self-interest to do that, and maybe even the individuals, right? When we think it down to the consumer, that they also have to think in terms of, this is about my survival and my capabilities. All right, gentlemen. Hey, we are at time. Thank you very much for an outstanding discussion. I think we hit on some great points here. Not only the areas that we need to be worried about moving forward, but also some opportunities for all of us in the industry and the ecosystem to, make technology more trustworthy and better for all of us.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Matt.
Deidre, are you